House events featuring GOP and Democratic presidential hopefuls. We take you live now to the Potomac Institute for policy studies for a look at escalating violence in Jerusalem. Scholars and diplomats from the region will talk about what's needed to create stability and lasting peace in the Middle East.
Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to start. Would you kindly turn off your cell phone? Good afternoon. My name is Yonah Alexander. I'm the director of the Inter-University Center for Terrorism Studies that is administered by the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies, the International Center for Terrorism Studies, as well as the Inter-University Center for Legal Studies at the International Law Institute, in cooperation with many academic institutions, universities around the world. Specifically, I'd like to mention the Center for National Security of the University of Virginia School of Law. On behalf of Mike Swetnam, the CEO and chairman of the Potomac Institute, he extends his welcome to you. Unfortunately, is out of the country, as I understand. At any rate, on his behalf and our colleagues, and the Vice President in the back, Tom O'Leary, who is with us, and of course, General Gray, who is the chairman of the board of Regents, and the 29th Commandant of the Marine Corps, and he joined us, and as always, we'll have the last word. But at any rate, let me welcome the speakers. First, right here, Professor Mohammed Dajani, to my left, who is currently a fellow at the Washington Institute, and he obviously contributed a great deal, I think, to understand moderate Islam. He served as a professor of political science at the Al-Quds University in Jerusalem, and he will make a presentation today. And obviously many of you are familiar with the very distinguished contribution and involvement of his family in Jerusalem. We do have, obviously, the information about the speakers, so I won't go into details. Our speaker from the Israeli embassy in Washington, the Deputy Head of Mission, Reuven Azar, will also participate, and he also is well known to the audience here. He participated in a number of our seminars and contributed to our report on the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and so forth. Now, basically, our mission, I think, today is to deal with the question of Jerusalem, whether the escalating tension and violence in recent months, at least the last 3 months, can ignite a religious war in the Middle East and beyond. And yet, at the time of Christmas that the world is celebrating peace on earth, the question arises whether the spirit of the sacred city of Jerusalem, the city that is honored through Judaism and Christianity and Islam, would encourage building the foundation for lasting peace in the Middle East and the Holy Land and so on. And this and other issues will be included. Discussion, for example, the historical context, background of Jerusalem, the political and legal aspect, as well as the various related issues, the role of religion, for example. So I would like to invite the speakers. They will take over in a few minutes. I would like to thank our CISPAN radio and television for bringing this seminar to the attention of a wider audience in the United States and internationally. In addition to that, as always, we like to mention anniversary dates related to violence with the hope that perhaps we can diffuse some of the negative aspects of the religionization of conflicts and try to advance the cause of peace with justice. So number one, we remember the victims of violence and terrorism. Let me mention two specifically. One, in fact, related to today date, December 21, 1988, which is the 27th anniversary of the Pan-American Flight 103 that destroyed over Lockerbie, Scotland, 259 passengers who were killed, most of them, of course, Americans, and 11 on the ground in Lockerbie. And many of you will remember that Libya was responsible for that tragedy. And also on Christmas Day, 2009, the 60th anniversary, the Nigerian Mutabalib, who attempted to destroy, to detonate plastic explosives on the Northwest Flight 253 over Detroit. Of course, it was connected with the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And clearly, we have to remember many of the other victims, particularly in recent time, all the way from Paris to California, to Ankara, Beirut, Jerusalem, Sinai, and so forth. Now, one footnote as a moderator. I feel that I am really a Jerusalemite, meaning that for 25 years I lived, studied, and worked in Jerusalem. Although my family came to Palestine, the first group came in 1921, then the early 30s, and I grew up in the city of Tel Aviv, but I always consider myself a member of the population of Jerusalem. On the academic level, I was involved in teaching at Hebrew University for some 25 years related to war and peace and terrorism. Now, I would like to mention specifically in June 1967, I had the great privilege and honor to open the Mount Scopus campus specifically since we do have a few lawyers here at the law school. And I had a group of students, about 30 students, who came from the United States and other countries. So the first assignment that I gave to the students was not to write a paper, but to clean up the classroom that was not used for about 19 years because of the separation of the old city from the new city or the western city in Jerusalem. And since that time, we had scholars who came from all over the world to join us and participate in our academic work, including some of the leaders of Israel, like Shimon Peres, for example, and Yitzhak Rabin. We had also a clergy, Christian, Muslims, and others who participated in our work. So again, academically, we focused on Jerusalem for a very long time. I'd just like to mention one particular study which is related to our topic today, not for publicity purposes, but back in 1973, we had a project at Columbia University, the School of Journalism. How can religion advance the cause of peace in the Middle East? And we produced a book on the role of communications in the Middle East. I'm mentioning this because there is no way that one can discuss the issue of Jerusalem separate from the Arab-Palestinian conflict, the Arab-Israeli conflict, or the conflict between Israel and the Muslim world, and the international issue. So let me just begin by reminding all of us we are familiar with Jerusalem the same way we're familiar with the White House and Washington and Moscow and Berlin and elsewhere. But again, just to remind us, what are we talking about? Going back to the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Temple in Jerusalem, and Professor Dajani will go into some details. Right here, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. In other words, we're talking about the sacred sites in Jerusalem and the status of the sites. Then the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and of course the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, the remnant of the temple that held the great build, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then of course the pilgrimage of the Pope Francis to Jerusalem, the Wailing Wall and elsewhere. So again, I think we have a big agenda. And again, the question I think that we're going to discuss today, what are the factors that encourage violence and terrorism and perhaps might trigger a third world war, as some people predict? How can we diffuse some of the negative theological elements from a political conflict related to Israel, Palestine, and so on, and perhaps this can serve as a model for other conflicts around the world. So with this, I would like to invite Reuven, Azar, to come up and discuss some of the issues.
Thank you, Yonah. Good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure for me to appear before here in the Potomac Institute again. I think that the key for peace, if we want to avoid the continuation of war, the key is acceptance. Acceptance, it means acceptance of the other. I could speak here for a whole hour, maybe for a whole day, regarding the connection between the Jewish people and Jerusalem, and talk about the history of Jerusalem, how it was established as the capital of the Israeli kingdom by King David 3,000 years ago, and about the first and the second temple, and the fact that Jews pray 3 times a day, every day, for going back to Jerusalem, to restore Jerusalem as the capital and as the place in which the temple is restored, etc. We mention Jerusalem in funerals, in weddings. It's part and parcel of the life of any Jew. But in order to get to peace, we have to accept also the other, and the other has to accept us. Another thing that we have to do is, instead of exploiting religion to radicalize, we have to exploit religion to moderate, as a force of moderation. And that is a very difficult task, especially today, with the situation we have in the region, because unless we defeat the radicals, we won't be able to do it. Sometimes I'm hearing in the last few months, here in Washington and other places, when it comes to ISIS, people say that ISIS are ignorant. Unfortunately, they are not. Their methods are terrible. But the leaders of ISIS have an ideology, and they are educated. So the problem that we have is that the radicals are educated. And unless we defeat them, it will be very difficult to promote the message of the acceptance of the other and to use religion to promote moderation. Now, one of the problems that we have in Jerusalem, I'm also a Jerusalemite, I was raised there, is that religion is being manipulated. In the last spark of violence that we are suffering from now, before that there was a campaign, a well-organized campaign, actually by the Islamic movement in Israel, claiming that Israel wants to change the status quo of the Temple Mount, now of the Haram al-Sharif. Now, this is not the first time that religion is being manipulated in that way. It goes back to the beginning of the conflict. Even not only before 67, but before 48. In 1929, for example, when a terrible massacre happened in Jerusalem, Hebron, the very old community of Hebron was erased from the map. People were killed. It was sparked by initiative of Jews in the Wailing Wall to put a separation between men and women. So this sparked a rumor that the Jews are going to take over the Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount. And what happened is that before the 20s, it was well known, including in the publications of the Waqf at that time. I think it was Rob Sattler from the Washington Institute that found this booklet in the Library of Congress or archives that mentioned a publication of the Waqf from 1923 that said that the Haram al-Sharif is the same location in which the Temple of Solomon was built. And actually, the term Beit al-Maqdas, like in Hebrew, Beit HaMikdash, is something that is well known. Actually, one of the ISIS-related organizations, Ansar Beit al-Maqdas, they exist in the Sinai. So this rejectionism of trying to rewrite history and disconnect the narrative of the Jews and their connection to the Holy Land was part of a nationalistic, anti-nationalistic or anti-Zionist movement. And it was actually there the seed of what we know today as the Palestinian movement. Although the first, those rejectionists, the first ones like Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam or Hajj Amin al-Husseini, weren't necessarily defining themselves as Palestinians. Okay? So how can we deal with rejectionism? That is a very, very difficult challenge because, and I followed it when I served in Jordan, in Amman. We were dealing on a day-to-day basis on trying to, settle this problem that we have. The approach of Israel has been very interesting because when we came to Jerusalem back in 1967, after all these years, hundreds of and thousands of years of praying for Jerusalem, when Moshe Dayan came to the Temple Mount, to the Haram al-Sharif, he sat on the floor, he called for the priests, the Aukaf people, and he gave them the keys for the temple. The idea of the leaders at that time was that in order for us to solve the conflict, what we have to do at the end of the day is to separate between religion and religious rights and to show religious tolerance and not to take over the places that are sacred for the others. Another very important event was in 1994 when Prime Minister Rabin signed the peace agreement, the peace accord with Jordanians, because that was the first time that any leader in the world recognized the role of the Hashemites on the Haram al-Sharif. Now, why Israel did that? Because Israel wanted to maintain and to promote the idea that you can separate and solve religious issues separately from national issues. We have a national conflict, we have to solve it, but if we draw religion into the conflict, we won't be able to solve it. So we have to respect other religions and respect the role and also the religious role of the legitimate leaders in the region. That was very interesting because at that point in time, no other Arab leader has declared that it respects de jure the role of the Hashemite family in the Haram. And Israel was the first one. Last year, I think, or 2 years ago, Abu Mazen was the second one to recognize the role of the Hashemite family and the Hashemite king in Jerusalem. So, in the last 2 years, I think we are also having another phenomena that is worrying for us, because although Israel is a democracy and we respect religion and we are being and although we are being attacked for many years, there is a radicalization process in Israel itself as well, and we have Jewish radicals. Of course, you cannot compare them what's going on in the region, but we have to deal with that. And we've seen in the last year or two an increase in the number of victims of Jewish terror. And we've seen some people in Israel that are trying to call for the change in the status quo in the Temple Mount, in the Haram. Now, what Israel is trying to do is, first of all, to fight that radicalization by all its means, because the president, the prime minister, the security authorities are doing as much as they can in order to thwart those radicals, whether it be the Hilltop Youth or whether it be other people that are trying to promote violence. But also, I think the government has come out and said very clearly, the prime minister said very clearly that Israel will not change the status quo in the Temple Mount. There is incitement around this, there is propaganda, and people around the Arab world are completely sure that Israel wants to take over Al-Aqsa Mosque or the Haram al-Sharif, but we are not going to do that because we believe that although Jerusalem and although that place, which is the most sacred place for us, has a connection to us, we have to respect also the aspirations and the religion of others. So, just to wrap it up, I would say that if we manage to find partners that not only will join us in promoting moderation, but also will recognize our narrative, then we have a chance of negotiating peace. You know, we have negotiated even Jerusalem in the last few years when under the Barak government, during the Olmert government, and the suggestions on the table were very, very revolutionary and very ambitious. I think that we can get to that point when we hear from the other side, from the leaders of the Palestinians and leaders of the Arab world, that they are willing to recognize the historic connection of the Jews to the Holy Land and to Jerusalem, the religious connection, and the national connection. If we hear that, if Israelis hear that from the other side, I think that we'll be much more prone to compromise on the issue of Jerusalem. So that's more or less wraps it up.
Okay,
thank you very much.
I'm going to let you go. I know you have a schedule conflict here, but let me ask you two questions. Number one, to provide some clarity, you mentioned the role of Jordan in particular, the very unique role, and just for transparency, I invited also the diplomats from the Embassy of Jordan. Because of schedule conflict, they couldn't make it, but clearly, by the way, I attended that ceremony, the peace between Jordan and Israel. Now, the question is related to the status, number one, of Jerusalem, the whole idea of the internationalization of Jerusalem that was initially advanced at the partition resolution 1947 and later on. Secondly, the status of the sacred sites, not only in Jerusalem, but elsewhere like Bethlehem, Nazareth, and so forth. So in other words, since we do have a number of lawyers here, I thought it would be of great interest.
Thank you. Well, again, I think here we have to separate between national rights and religious rights. We have a conflict with the Palestinians. We think that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel because of our connections that are already mentioned with the city, and this is something that we have to settle with the Palestinians. And there were different stages in which we negotiated such a solution. On the religious side, I think that we have to stick to the principle that we are not going to mix religious rights with national rights. And it's interesting because in our area of the world, unlike in the West, in our model of democracy, we don't separate religion and state. But even though we don't separate religion and state, because of many historical and cultural reasons, we can, when it comes to rights, we can do the separation. And I think this can help us in getting into the solution. And such solutions, when it comes to control of religious sites, we are already almost there, because the Holy Sepulchre is controlled by Christians, and the Haram al-Sharif is controlled by Muslims, and the Wailing Wall is controlled by Jews. So we can find, when it comes to religion, as long as everybody has the right to exercise their religion, we can find a solution.
Maybe we can go a little bit deeper into this issue. The claim, for example, that Israel is trying to change the status quo on the Temple Mount and so forth. And again, this actually does encourage, I think, more tension and violence. It reminds me very vividly going back to 1969 when I was again teaching in Jerusalem, and there was an Australian Christian who set fire to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and this inflamed actually not only the people in Jerusalem, the Palestinians, the Arabs, but Muslims all over the world. So my question is, what is basically the Israeli policy vis-a-vis to preserve the status quo in Jerusalem and elsewhere?
So I'll answer it with an example. When I was in Jordan, I saw that there is something going on in the Jordanian press, because the Jordanian press was translating the protocols of the meetings of the Israeli Knesset, in which members of Knesset of Israel were asking why cannot Jews come to mosques and pray, because it would be their natural right, according to them. So the Jordanian opposition was translating that, and that created a sort of series of attacks of the opposition in Jordan against the Jordanian government, against the king. And it played into the conspiracy theories that Raed Salah, which is the leader of the Islamic movement in Israel, that cooperates with Hamas, it played into this game. So it didn't help how many times Israel said it's not going to change the status quo, and it doesn't matter whether Israeli police actually polices the place, and every Jew that comes to the Temple Mount or to the Haram is being watched by the police, so he doesn't open his mouth and pray. Okay, this is so delicate. So the government is doing its work, but the problem is that there is a lot of people around that are playing with this, because they want to, or because they are zealots, or because they want to politically. And our challenge is to cope with it. So fortunately, we are now engaged with the Jordanian government. We are trying to advance this project of putting cameras on the Temple Mount, so people have a chance to look directly, live, what's going on. Usually what used to happen is that because of the fact that people that were called the Murabitun or the Murabitat, that are linked with the Islamic movement, used to go to the mosques, stay there for the night, and then in the morning try to disrupt either Jews that were coming as tourists to the mount, or throw stones at the Wailing Wall. So before the last Jewish feast, beginning of the year, there was a plot actually to use explosives, and that was something that we foiled, and that generated this whole series of incitement and violence, etc. So we have a challenge, and as much as we have cooperation from the Jordanians, and we wish we have cooperation from the Palestinian leadership that has to not to promote the incitement, but actually to condemn the incitement. If we have that, we can take control of the situation. But if we don't, this will continue to be a very serious problem for us.
Reuven, I have last actually a question before we open it up to questions from the audience, and this would relate maybe to your experience again in Amman and in Cairo on the peace negotiations, because many people are concerned that you cannot solve the problem of Jerusalem without solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict with the Palestinian Authority and so forth. Are you pessimistic or optimistic that that particular conflict, not only between the Palestinian and the Israelis, but the Israelis with some of the other Arab countries, such as Saudi Arabia and the Muslim world at large, can be resolved, and thereby you can also resolve the issue of Jerusalem?
Well, I'm optimistic, first of all, because I'm an optimistic person. But in addition to that, I'm optimistic because, first of all, I believe in the power of the Jewish people and the state of Israel to prevail these attacks. But also I'm optimistic because I think that something very substantial is going on in the region now and in the world. People understand what are the dangers of militant Islam, of radical Islam, and people in the region also understand how undermined they are by this fight of ideologies. And a few years ago, when we were doing our annual research, my previous position, I was head of Middle East research. We identified that there is a phenomena that is actually a stabilizer within the destabilized region that we have. And this stabilizer, we call it, instead of calling it the grass of the neighbor is always greener, we say the grass of the neighbor is actual darker. When For example, Arab Israelis look what's going on in the region. Or when Palestinians in the West Bank look at what's going on in Gaza. And they look what's going on in Syria. Many people have a sense of how threatened they are by these radical forces. It's not that they are becoming suddenly very in love with Israel, okay? But they understand what is realistic and what is not. They understand that, first of all, for example, as Arab Israelis, they have a chance to fight for equality. Jordanians and Egyptians understand that Israel is a force for stability in the region. And it doesn't generate love for Zionism, okay? But it generates a realistic sense that we have to work together to fight extremism, to fight the Iranian threat, to fight ISIS, to fight all the other threats that we have in the region right now. And in that sense, I think that we have a chance. We are cooperating much more than we cooperated in the past with the Jordanians, with the Egyptians, with the Palestinian security forces. Because they know that if we don't cooperate, at the end of the day, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and ISIS and Hizb al-Tahrir and you name it, they will take over. So if we manage to exacerbate that and to cooperate that and to combine it with strong leadership and a peace process that includes acceptance, then I think we will be better off.
Okay, we have a few minutes also to ask the audience for some questions. So if you have a question or comment, please identify yourself. Yeah.
Hi. My name is Ron Taylor. I'm a senior fellow with the George Washington University Center for Cyber and Homeland Security, but I do a lot in counterterrorism. So from the outside, the Mideast always looks unstable, and stability, instability are sort of a time have a time dependence to them. You know, whether you're stable for a long time, a short period of time is kind of a relative thing. And I guess my question is, what do you see as the future of, I just keyed off of your comment about Israel being a force for stability, and I can see that in other countries in the region. What do you see as the future for the nation state itself in that area? Because, that also is an example of a possible degeneration of the nation state concept.
Right. I think that's a great question, and this is a question I was trying to discuss with my researchers back when I was in Jerusalem. And when we were looking at the region, for many years we were looking at the region, and we had Mubarak, and we had Assad, and we had King Hussein, and it's like, it wasn't very thrilling. It was very stable, and we didn't foresee many changes. Now, you have to open every day a new file for the new organizations and the new people that are becoming active in the region. So at some point I told to my team, look, let's stop looking at countries. Let's start looking at institutions. Okay, which are the institutions in the region that you can count on to be influenced, to be influenced? And when it comes to your question, what are the institutions that we can embrace and we can reinforce in order to cooperate with us? Okay, so when you look at the Egyptian army, for example, okay, people are not very prone, or they don't like in the West the Egyptian army, and I can understand them. When it comes to Israel, also it's not very encouraging. There is this famous joke about, it's not famous, maybe it will be now, about when the Muslim Brotherhood had broken the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. So many nationalists in Egypt were saying, he's a Zionist, he's cooperating with the Israelis. And when Sisi brokered the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood was saying he's a Zionist. So if both of them were right, most of the Egyptians would be Zionists, but unfortunately they're both wrong. But this is the situation. These are the institutions we have. Whether it is the Egyptian army, or whether it is the Muslim Brotherhood, or any other force, any other institution that takes power, we have to look, if it's not completely legitimate because it kills everybody like Assad or like ISIS. We have to see how to reinforce those players and those institutions. In Jordan, you have a strong government, you have a strong intelligence service. So you have structures, you have a strong financial banking system. Let's work with those. Let's reinforce those that have the chance to deliver. Okay? The same goes to the Palestinian Authority. We have a process of 20 years in which we invested. Okay, we are not saints, Israelis. Maybe we would have invested, if we would have invested more, we would be better off. But you have an investment of 20 years that failed. You have Palestinian security apparatus that work, but they are not capable of foiling a plot by Hamas, for example. So how can we change that? How can we make the Palestinian security apparatus to deliver for Palestinians, including against Hamas? If we succeed in that, maybe we'll have a Palestinian state. The approach has to be bottom up. This is what I think.
Anybody else? Yes, Professor Lawson.
Hi, Don Lossman. Thank you for your time here. If there's to be negotiated mutual recognition, Palestinians would like to raise their flag in Jerusalem, and at one time that was the Olam Lo, no, by Israelis. Is it conceivable that the Arab sector of Jerusalem can become a Palestinian capital as well?
It's going to be up to the leaders at that time to determine. We can be in a theoretical situation that this is solved some way or another, and flags is part of the solution. You can imagine anything, and you have to imagine everything if you want to reach a settlement. But the question really is how to get there, because we thought for many years, and people are telling us, especially now that you have the Arab Spring, you should have used this for the advantage of promoting peace with the Palestinians. But one of the most difficult things that I have, the most difficult challenges that I face here in Washington, is to sort of give the sense of the Israeli psyche. Now, Professor Dajani, I think, worked on that, and he did remarkable work in trying to, pass the psyche of Israelis to Palestinians. Okay, but I'm failing as an Israeli to communicate the psyche of Israelis to Americans. Because when you see ISIS decapitating some heads in Syria, people here get very mobilized and they want to fight radical Islam, right? Imagine what happens to Israelis in times like this, when they see what's going on in the region, how more conservative they become, how much risk-averse they become. So, of course, we don't want to be in a situation right now that we give territory back and you have an ISIS flag on the other side of the border. So we have to build bottom-up in order to secure the region by having a player there that will be pro-Western, that will be democratic, that will be uncorrupt, that will make the future Palestinian state thrive. And not, as Kissinger said, I think it was 2 months ago, when he came to a commemoration for Rabin, not establish another Arab failed state in our border. We don't want that.
Okay. Another question right there.
Yes. Hi, my name is Hassan. I was born in Tehran. Jerusalem, as you know, is interest of major religions. And for many years, there were struggle between everybody. Now, we like to know at what point would people of Israel feel secure that the conflict can end. So you have some kind of vision what that security can be. 20 years, 50 years, 100 years from now? Because it's been going on about 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to hear that. And also, one more question. Since Moses, peace be upon him, came out of Egypt, it's been about, 3,000 years, 4,000 years? How many Jewish people we have in the world?
Well, the last question. Today, the estimation is that there are about 18 million Jews. The Jewish religion, unlike Christianity and Islam, is not in the business of getting more more converts. And being a Jew was very difficult for many centuries for reasons that you already know. Pogroms, attacks against Jews, etc. But going back to your question, I think that we're going to feel secure when we have we have a situation in which we have no more rejection, but acceptance, and that we have security. If you have, because even not only the Israeli right, the Israeli extreme right is not in favor of controlling the life of Palestinians. So the question is whether we can get into a regime that is strong enough, that will maintain security in a way that we can also withdraw from places in which we mutually agree with Palestinians that will be the future Palestinian state. That can happen in 5 years, in 10 years, in 100, I don't know. But we have to work on it so it happens.
Yeah, thanks very much. Mike Kraft, I'm an old Mideast hand and counterterrorism specialist. And my question is about Jerusalem itself. I had first visited Jerusalem as a young reporter before the 67 war. It was a pretty deadly city, frankly. And then I've been there since then, and there's a fair amount of integration. You would see Arab families in Ben Yehuda Street and the malls and things of that sort. But since the recent outbreak of violence, I understand that barriers have been put up between the two sides of Jerusalem, and the city is more or less divided. Do you foresee that things will go back to, quote, normal very quickly if the violence ends, or how do you see the future of Jerusalem functioning as a city?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we have experience with that, and we've seen waves of violence before. And as much as the waves were higher, the security measures were also tighter. What we're trying to do this time, I think, what the government is trying to do, is to keep normal life as much as they can. And I'll give you one example. This is the movement from Palestinian workers to Israel. There are about 120,000 Palestinians from the West Bank that are coming to Israel to work every day. And although a very small number of them, one or two, have been involved in stabbings, the Israeli government is withstanding a lot of pressure from cabinet members and from other people to put a closure on the West Bank. Now, when it comes to Jerusalem itself, we have erected this fence and wall in Jerusalem. In the Second Intifada, we didn't want to do that. Actually, the right wing in Israel was against it. The center and the left in Israel were for it because they wanted to protect themselves from attacks. They wanted to protect life, which is the main right that you have. Now, whether we can redo that, I hope that we can. I hope that if we not only see this way of violence waning, but we reach a settlement, we can remove those security measures. And we've seen in the past that after the Second Intifada, as the situation was stabilizing, we removed many restrictions.
No, the clock is ticking. You have a question? Okay, one more question.
Hi, Daphne Kamelli, Potomac Institute. In view of the ISIS escalation around the world right now, do you foresee any change in the government position now or in the Israeli government positions?
Regarding what?
Regarding peace and regarding security.
Well, I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu said in his last visit to Washington that, first of all, we have an opportunity to cooperate with our Arab neighbors, Arab countries that are interested, like us, in fighting the radicals, the Islamic radicals, in fighting attempts to change, to subvert their own regimes. And we can maybe, in the right circumstances, create a dialogue, a regional dialogue, that will be conducive to the bilateral effort between us and the Palestinians. So I think that there is a hope of doing that. Having said that, as I said before, we will have to overcome a lot of animosity and fear that is created exactly by these kind of forces. I don't have to go far away. What happened after several attacks of ISIS in this hemisphere? How people are reacting in this hemisphere? in this country. So also Israelis have to overcome that. The mere fact that, people, one of the great traumas of this nation is 9/11. Israel has been in 9/11 for the last 67 years. So the possibility to change the psyche and to go from a situation in which you become less risk averse is going to be an enormous challenge. And we have to work together with our neighbors to try to lower those barriers of fear.
Okay, I know you have to leave. I cannot resist but ask you a final question. We focus on the Palestinian and some of the Arab states. Can you comment on the role of Iran? Of course, everyone is looking at the Iranian nuclear issue, but how is the link with the issue of Jerusalem? In other words, the Iranian, the non-Arab state view related to the solution of the Jerusalem problem.
Well, this is another impediment. The Iranian revolution has created what we call the Al-Quds Day. You have these marches in Tehran every year. Today, the Iranian regime wants to challenge not only the legitimacy of Israeli control of Jerusalem, but also the legitimacy of control of the Saudis of Mecca. It's a much larger conflict and rivalry that you have there, and the other problem is that the Iranians are much more powerful. The capitulations of ISIS are very intimidating, but what happens with countries that are trying to possess nuclear weapons? And they have missile technology, and they have forces in the region that are working to assist, players like Assad and others. That's a much more difficult challenge, but I think that we've proved in the past that we can overcome that. When, for example, we did Oslo with the Palestinians. Yes, the Iranians were there in 1994 to try to foil that, to promote Hamas, to promote the suicide attacks of Hamas. We are going to have all the time the Iranians trying to foil any peace that we broker between us and the Palestinians or the Arabs. We've seen the subversion of Iran in Jordan, for example. So we have a challenge, but it doesn't mean that we cannot continue the thrive for peace.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
for coming. I know you have to leave and continue with Professor Dajani. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Professor Alexander and the Potomac Institute for inviting me. What I'd like to do is to explore the status of Jerusalem and the hope of offering insights into how to resolve the problem. I will start by introducing my familiar association with the city, and then talk a little bit about the history of the city, and then discuss some potential way of trying to resolve the problem of the city. Actually, in 1529, the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman appointed my great-grandfather, Sheikh Ahmad, to be, and his family, as the custodians of the King David tomb. So it was, and then the first mayor, actually, the Ottoman Empire started the municipalities in the empire by having one in Istanbul. The second one was in Jerusalem. And Abdurrahman Dajani was appointed then as a mayor, and also Arif Dajani became a mayor in 1918. This is family picture for the family in 1942. This is my father's wedding. And actually in 1948, the Dajani family saved Martin Poopers and his family, hiding them in their homes in the Arab quarter after the Jewish quarter fell, and saving Buber Library from being burnt. So that was the family association with there is a lot, but I just mentioned it. This is a verse in the Quran that actually reflects this talk that I'm going to talk about, in which it says that God alternate that between people. And so that's why what I'll be focusing in what I'm saying is how the rule over Jerusalem has been alternated between the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jew. And so it is basically from the ancient. Throughout its history, Jerusalem has been the site of glories and catastrophes, a place that has been witness to transition and occupation by a diversity of nations and target of pilgrimage throughout the nations. Jews believe that the Red Sea was open to allow the Jews to cross safely and then closed to drown Pharaoh and his army, and that Moses spoke to God on Mount Sinai and received from him the 10 Commandments. Christians believe that Jesus resurrected the dead, and Muslims believe the nocturnal journey of Muhammad to Jerusalem carried by al-Buraq steed, where he met Archangel Gabriel and descended to heaven and met the prophets and God. So to each his narrative. Part of the solution to the conflict is to respect the narrative of the other and not to deny it or to refute it. In 1638, Muslims conquered Jerusalem, and Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab arrived to the city on a camel and was taken by Patriarch Sophronius to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. When it was time for prayer, he was invited to pray in the church, but refused, fearing Muslims would turn churches into mosques, which some of them did later. He prayed outside, and on the site of his act of worship arose the Mosque of Umar. So if you go to the Holy Sepulchre, facing you, you will be finding the Mosque of Umar where he prayed. Caliph Umar asked to be taken to the sacred rock from which Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. He built a mosque near it, which is called now Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was called Al-Aqsa Mosque. Umar allowed Jews to return and reside in Jerusalem after they were being banned from doing so. The Umayyads later built the Dome of the Rock Mosque on the site of the same rock where Abraham was prepared to sacrifice his son, and it was said that also Noah had put that the ship of Noah also has landed on that rock, which is very holy. So basically in 1852, Sultan Abdul Majid issued the Status Quo Declaration, which regulated mutual rights of Christian institutions in Jerusalem and asserted the status quo in Jerusalem should prevail. And actually this status quo has been respected even till this very day. Though the Turks surrendered the city of Jerusalem in November 1917, General Allenby delayed his entrance to the city till 9th of December to coincide with Christmas celebrations to give his conquest, his victory, a religious aura. Austrian troops left the city in 1916, and then actually he dismounted from his horse to enter it on foot in respect for the city. And it was partly in response to the pompous entry of German Kaiser Wilhelm II on a white horse upon his visit in 1898, and thus the wall was partly breached to accommodate him. So actually here there are two things that both visits has harmed Jerusalem. One is the visit of Kaiser, where the wall was actually breached in order to allow him to go in, and this Jaffa Gate, it became Jaffa Gate there. And so he walked in on foot, and then he delivered his victory speech, Allenby, pledging Jerusalem to be the city of peace. In November 1947, the UN partition resolution decided that to internationalize the city. So basically it was divided, and Palestine was divided into an Arab state and a Jewish state, and Jerusalem was supposed to be internationalized, including Bethlehem. However, the fighting, when the British left Palestine, the British general was asked, "To whom did you leave Palestine?" And his response was, "I left the key under the door mattress." So for whoever, and so after the 1948 war, 85% of Jerusalem was captured by Jewish forces, which became West Jerusalem. 11% of the city, including the whole city, fell under the control of Jordan. And 4% of the city was considered no man's land, in which the UN headquarters was established. So on December 13, 1949, Israel declared West Jerusalem the capital of Israel in violation of international law and UN resolution. On December 19, the UN responded by restating the intention to place Jerusalem under a permanent international regime. However, the city remained divided under Israeli and Jordanian rule. So it was in June 1967, Israel reunited East and West Jerusalem, but the city remained divided socially and psychologically. In June 1967, the Israeli Knesset extended the Israeli jurisdiction to East Jerusalem, despite international law. So here we have, and this is the crux of the problem, because people would say, why should Israel give up Jerusalem or should concede anything in Jerusalem? So the question lies here in the international law, because in 1948, Jewish forces captured West Jerusalem and later declared it capital of Israel, overriding a 1947 UN resolution to internationalize the city. In 1967, Israeli forces captured East Jerusalem and later declared it eternal capital of Israel, overriding a UN resolution not to change the character of the city. I will come to the significance of this later. However, Israel kept the administration of the Haram al-Sharif compound, continued to be maintained by the Jordanian religious Waqf. So in September 1993, the Declaration of Principle listed Jerusalem as one of the issues to be negotiated at a later stage. And the Israeli foreign minister at the time, Shimon Peres, promised that nothing will hamper the activity of Palestinian institution. On the contrary, the fulfillment of this important mission is to be encouraged in East Jerusalem. In October 1994, also the treaty between Israel and Jordan reaffirmed the status of Jordan as the custodian for the holy places. So here we have three initiatives that also focused on Jerusalem and granting the Palestinians and the Israelis equal status in Jerusalem, which was the roadmap, the Clinton plan, and also the Arab Peace Initiative. There were also joint initiatives between Palestinians and Israelis calling for the formation of a Palestinian state and having Jerusalem serve as the capital for both cities. This city of Jerusalem has a special place in the consciousness of the great monotheistic religions. For centuries it has been this vital center of worship for the three world religions, Judaism, Christianity and Islam. Any lasting solution should take into consideration this religious and historic attachment of the three religions to this city. So here we have two clashing narratives. The Palestinians consider East Jerusalem as the capital of the prospective state of Palestine, and Israel maintains that Jerusalem is united as its eternal capital, but without international recognition. So basically, what I'd like to focus on is the present also status. Here we have 350,000 Palestinians of East Jerusalem who have residency rights in Jerusalem. They carry a blue identity card, and they can move from Jerusalem to the West Bank or even from Jerusalem to Israel without any problem. They hold Israeli identity cards which give them the right to work and move freely across the country and the West Bank and to cross checkpoints and the separation wall built in 2003. 145,000 Palestinian residents live outside the Jerusalem separation wall, while 195 live inside the separation wall, and more than 10,000 Palestinians who live in Jerusalem do hold Israeli citizenship. However, here it is important to note that the clash in Jerusalem between the Palestinians and the Israeli is focused also on the way things are, in the sense that there are a negative side to the Israeli policies in Israel. Although Palestinians benefit a lot from being residents of East Jerusalem from the Israelis, particularly in healthcare. And Palestinians have a much better healthcare in Jerusalem as residents of Jerusalem than they do in the West Bank or in Gaza, and even they take they benefit a lot from the Israeli healthcare system. However, they suffer from also the certain policies that are there, which is one, the Judaization of the city, which actually in the last 10 years have accelerated a lot, in which even names of streets have been changed. In the past, Israelis used to put 3 languages, Hebrew, English, and Arabic. But now, the tendency is to put only Hebrew or Hebrew and English. Also, the threat to strip Palestinians from their residency rights. This is a very serious problem that actually makes Palestinians very insecure and unstable because of this threat that any time their ID can be revoked. So we have poor public services in Palestine compared to the in East Jerusalem compared to West Jerusalem. There is a big gap between what we call West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem. Although East Jerusalem Palestinians comprise 32% of the city's total population, now this percentage is decreasing. They pay 30% of the city's budget, yet receive less than 5% of the municipal budget. Now, because of a lot of pressure on the municipality, this has been improving, that the municipality is paying more attention to East Jerusalem, which it was not. And so the Jerusalem municipality invests 6 times on Jewish residents than Palestinian residents. And you can see that in terms of public services, like parks, like children clinics, like different facilities within the city. So, for instance, the municipality is in charge of Israeli schools where the students are being provided with a lot of facilities, while actually the same Palestinian schools are in very bad conditions. So actually when you are talking about a young kid who takes a knife and goes and commits terrorism, it is also in the education, because he's receiving very bad education. He has to go to schools because there are no facilities, and this is also part of the problem that we are having. Residential buildings are converted to schools, cram school classes, the schoolyards are narrow, there are not much sport facilities, no computers, labs or libraries, no heating in freezing winter, poor lighting. So we are having a lot of problems where students, this is why students hate to go to school. We have to make them love to come to school rather than be in the street. And that's also part of the problem. Also the home demolition policy is affecting their psychology. And also there is a lot of despair as a result of the political stalemate and the frustration from social and economic neglect, which have resulted in violent explosions as we see what is happening today. Militant Muslims extremists have exploited these deteriorating conditions to intensify the tensions. So also here we have the problem that there is a lot of donations that Arabs and others have made to improve the conditions of Palestinians in Jerusalem, yet the money disappears either with the PA or with the leaders of the religious leaders of the community. So the Palestinians do not see much of those donations. So here, if we want to seek solutions, we have to seek solution for Jerusalem issue. We need to filter out the symbolism, religious and overtones, and nationalist rhetoric from the political reality. The political reality today is that Israel rules the city but without international sovereignty recognition. So this is where where the rub lies. In this sense, why should Israel be able to actually share Jerusalem? And what will Israel get if it does want to share? It is international recognition. So that's actually part of what Israel may benefit from a deal on Jerusalem. So actually, if we look at Jerusalem, we notice that Jerusalem originally is divided into two cities in reality. This is the old city, which is divided into 4 quarters: the Jewish quarter, Christian, Armenian, and Muslim. And the vast areas have been annexed to Jerusalem. So if you see the old city, it is very small. It is more than 30% of that area has been annexed to the city. And so this is where, if we look at Jerusalem, we see a twin city. This is the holy city, which is referred to by religious holy books, is in the old city. And this is the old city was surrounded by a wall built by the Ottomans. So basically, we have there the 3 holy places, and that's why the old city is the holy city. And so this is the old city. So basically, only the old city and its immediate surroundings constitute the historic, what we call Jerusalem. Jerusalem that's being mentioned in the Bible in different holy books. It is the old city. So, but it is the municipal city that has been added, and if you notice, it has been added in a very erratic way. Why? In order to include areas and then exclude population there. So it is a very odd way. But notice that the old city there, it is there. The rest is not Jerusalem. When you want to decide on the future of Jerusalem, you have to make that definition, that distinction between the old city and the municipal city, the city that has been enlarged. So to agree in reconciliation in midst of conflict is that we need to agree on such issues as municipal services, day-to-day living problems, status of holy places, and to agree to disagree on issues such as political sovereignty. So the proposed solution is to have the holy old city to have a special international Jewish, Christian, Muslim custodianship, while the municipal city is a shared local custodianship. East is for the Arab Jerusalem, which is Muslim and Christian, and then the west is the Jewish Jerusalem, and then the city will be without barriers or restrictions. So basically, Israel would transfer the responsibility of this sewage, roads, schools, childcare, health and social services in East Jerusalem to the Palestinians. But however, taxes collected from Palestinian residents would be transferred to be used to improve the living conditions of Palestinians in Jerusalem neighborhoods. So basically, if we have a look at that, it is a win, whether it is a win-lose situation the way it is now standing, where it is ethnically divided, religiously and psychologically. Israel retains control of entire city, but it is unrecognized by international community. However, it's a win-win situation if we would share the city, and in this way to have the city open to the world to come and pray, and particularly to the Muslim, Christian and Jewish communities. And this way it will be recognized by the international community. It will bring in security and stability. So thank you very much. That's actually my take on this. Thank you very much.
I would say your presentation triggered many questions for the benefit of our young students here and the future leaders. It really reflects the complexity of the issue, and to approach the problem, we have to look at the interdisciplinary approach, all the way from the historical and sociological and religious and legal and strategic, political, and so on and so forth. Let me ask you specifically, if I may, again to come back to the question of the internationalization of Jerusalem. We tried to deal with that to some extent before, but as I recall vividly, the UN partition resolution that in 1947 actually recommended that the status of Jerusalem can be decided in about 10 years, whether the three religions will turn the city into international city. Tragically, that resolution and other resolutions were overcome by realities on the ground in terms of the conflict, for example, between Israel and Jordan, when Jordan controlled in 1948 the east section of Jerusalem. So what I'm really trying to say that obviously I think your presentation provides opportunities for I think modus vivendi and some sort of compromise, because the art of compromise is more powerful than judgment, and so on. But my question to you in regard to the internationalization of Jerusalem, again, since now we are in the spirit of Christmas, peace on earth, what do you think the religious communities can do to advance the cause of some sort of solution in Jerusalem with the spirit of Jerusalem? For example, the Pope, when he visited the Holy Land several years ago, and most recently in Africa, for example, in the Central African Republic, when he tried to bring together the Muslims and the Christians, he had a message of peace, of tolerance, the ecumenical approach. How do you think, in your long experience, and again, against the background of your very distinguished family in Jerusalem, how do you think the role of religion can be actually advancing some of the proposals that you made?
Actually, that's why I'm focusing on two aspects, the religious aspect and the political aspect. I'm thinking in terms of the old city to be dealt from the religious point of view. And it's a holy place, and people want to come to pray, whether they are Muslims, Christians, or Jews, or even non-Muslim, non-Christian, and Jew, because and this is a holy place, and people might want to come to visit there. So that's why I leave this religious aspect within the old city to a special custodianship, where actually it could be international, it could be a Muslim, Christian, Jewish international status, special status for the old city. And outside the city is where we can deal politically, because no matter what we say, what we do, outside the city is psychologically divided into an Arab sector, where it is Muslim and Christian people, Palestinians, and then there is the West Jerusalem, which is the Jewish sector. And there is a psychological barrier. And if you go to if you want to pick up a taxi from the Israeli side and ask him to take you to the Palestinian side, he will look at you and say, "Are you crazy?" And you go walk there. And so the areas that are Palestinians, Israelis do not feel secure to go to. Areas now which are Israelis, Palestinians do not feel secure. In the past, Palestinians used to go to the malls, but now Nobody is going to the mall or to the Israeli section because they're afraid. There is fear on both communities. So basically what I'm saying is that we have to deal with that fear. And we have one way is to have recognition of each other, rights of each other's history, of each other's culture, of each other's attachment in the city, and in this way to share the city. So I'm not in favor of having East Jerusalem to be capital or West Jerusalem to be political capitals. I believe they can be religious capitals. And if we can have East Jerusalem to be the religious capital of the Palestinian state of Palestine, the Jerusalem could be the religious capital of Israel. And this way we will be able to dissociate between the politics and the religion, because they are an explosive mix when they get together. But if we can separate them, and I'm trying to do that, I'm trying to separate the political from the religious by thinking in terms of outside the city, which is not holy, which has been annexed in the last 5 decades. And when you talk about Jerusalem, nobody refers to that area as Jerusalem. To divide it politically between the two parties, the two people, the two communities, but without walls, without barbed wires, without checkpoints, to have it open. And this is my vision for the future.
Right. My question again, having lived also in Jerusalem for at least a quarter century, it seems to me, how would you respond to those Jews who claim that if, for example, you establish a Muslim regime in East Jerusalem, you exclude the Jewish connection, let's say, to the Temple Mount and to the Wailing Wall and all that. And secondly, not only the Muslim I think, issue, but the Christian issue, because obviously the Christian holy sites are very significant for the Christian world. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And in fact, the reality is, as we know, even within the church, there is a separation between the Catholic, let's say, and the Armenian, the Ethiopian, the Greek Orthodox, and so on in terms of control of the church itself. So what I'm trying to actually advance, I think the idea of how religion can diffuse some of these negative elements from the political conflict and thereby try to find some political solution. Which would correspond to the reality on the ground as well.
Yeah, but that's exactly my point. When I'm saying that we have a special international religious Muslim, Christian, Jewish status quo for the whole cities, this includes all the holy places. The Holy Sepulchre is in the whole city. The Wailing Wall is in the whole city. The Haram Sharif is in the whole city. So these are not included within what I'm saying about an Arab Jerusalem, which is outside the wall. I'm separating between the holy places inside the wall, which are the holy places for all religions, from the area which is the municipal area outside the wall. So actually Muslims will not have a more say in the holy places than Christians or Jews, because what I'm trying to also include is the Christian element, because here people look at Jerusalem and they think as if it is a Jewish-Muslim conflict. It's not, because actually Christians own more land and property and holy places in Jerusalem than both, either Muslims or Jews. So basically that's why what I'm saying is that we need to have a custodianship of the old city, where the holy places are, by the three religions, and outside to be divided into these two political entities outside the city, which does not include the holy places.
Right. Let me ask you one more question, and then we'll open it up for dialogue with the audience. My question to you is, again, I always try to look at a common ground between the different religions. What is really common between Christianity and Islam and Judaism? And this is the sanctity of human life. If we save one life, it deems as if we saved the entire world. In other words, how can we protect the individual and the communities and somehow reduce the element of fear that you were talking about, and I fully agree with you, whether it is the taxi driver or to visit the mosque of Omar or the Wailing Ball and so on. So my question to you, from a religious point of view and approach, in other words, the message of the Pope, for example, can we establish a truth of God, meaning the immunity of the holy sites? In other words, that Christianity and Islam and Judaism will declare that we are not going to use that element as a friction and tension and conflict and explosion. In other words, to get the religious leaders of the different communities to unite and to come with a declaration how we can protect the holy sites and exclude that region that you're talking about, East Jerusalem, from the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in general, and so on and so forth. I think perhaps it can be a powerful message to the entire world how we can coexist with each other, because this is the purpose of those who were created by God, whether they're Muslims or Christians or Jews or Sikhs or members of any other religion. So in other words, not to leave the decision on the status of Jerusalem, for example, only to the politicians and diplomats, but also to the spiritual leaders of the different religions.
Actually, I believe that the three religions call for peace. I believe that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are religions of peace, religions of moderation, and that's actually in the holy books. Now, step aside from the propaganda and the media and the things where people say Islam is a religion of aggression, Islam is this. More than 50,000 violent incidents have taken place in the United States, and in 1 year, the 2015. Yet 3 incidents are done by Muslims, so Islam is being blended as a religion of violence because of that. Now, let us separate between the religious leaders and religions and what people do in the name of religion. I believe that religious leaders and the religions will call for peace and are for peace, and they will not stand in the way of having the whole city to be a custodianship of the 3 religions, and as a result we'll leave the politics outside the old city to the politicians to deal with East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. And that's why I'm talking about places of worship where anyone can go in and worship freely, openly, like they do in the Vatican. And once we move on, I think, with this concept, it becomes like every day, and it becomes normal. We have to normalize what is not normal today. We have to normalize peace. We have to really rehabilitate peace, because people now do not think much of peace and moderation. However, we have to rehabilitate that again and make people believe in that. Once they do, then you don't have to worry about, you have to worry more about who takes out the trash, the sanitary systems, the health, much more than the terrorism. And we have to diffuse the issue by making peace. And I don't believe that the present situation is a situation which is preserving the status quo could lead to peace. And that's why you are looking, what you are so concerned about is today. What I'm so looking for is tomorrow. I can see tomorrow a vision of peace, and I can see it where a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew can walk into Jerusalem in peace and harmony without having to fear the other. Now, there are minorities within these communities which are radicalized and who are instilling peace and hate and fear in the other in order to take control of the people, because they are a minority. And that's why we have to have the majority to wake up and be more vocal and be more active, to prove themselves and to stand up for peace. And I believe that it even does not need the religious leaders to do that. I think that the ordinary man in the street wants peace and wants to live in peace. And just give him the opportunity and take off this thorn, which is radicalism, that is being pinned in him. And this way I believe that we will move to a better future. I am optimistic. I look forward and I see the future where a Muslim, a Christian and a Jew will not have to worry about a knife or a bullet or a bomb, but rather they will live in peace, and that's the future of the city. Because we love the city and we love to see it more prosperous and to see it be the place where even Jews who would like to come and pray at the dome of the mosque should be open for anybody who wants to come and pray there. And the idea there is the politics is poisoning the environment. Once we remove the politics out of this context, I think we have a better future.
It's certainly a very worthy, I think, goal, and hopefully the religious leaders will pay attention to your message. Now we have a few minutes for Q&A if you do have any questions or comments. Again, Ron?
Hi, Ron Taylor with George Washington University, senior fellow there. So when I listen to the two of you talk right now, I hear Professor Yonah, asking for more of a concrete step to achieve exactly what you just described, Professor Dajani. And his proposal was maybe get religious leaders, from Muslim, Judaism, and Christian to make a statement of some kind. And, you seem to look forward into the future and go, I see that, but I don't see that it's necessary that the leaders make a statement. So I think I'll ask Yonah's question in a different way. Could you, because, people are just ordinary, and we all need something to look at to give us an example of how to get to the future. Could you imagine, how do we paint that picture for everyone of the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jew walking into the old city in a way that they get the point? What picture do we need to paint today that they get the point that you want to convey about the future?
We need to send the message that the three religions are not in clash with each other. And as a Muslim, as the founder of the Wasatiyah movement, I read my Quran and do not find a clash with the other. On the contrary, I see verses which tells me that in order for me to be a good Muslim, I have to recognize the other, Judaism, Christianity, whether the holy books or the prophets, and that I should cooperate with the other and that if God would have wished, He would have made us all one nation, or if God would have wished, He would have made us all one religion, or speak one language, or be one people, but that was not His desire. His desire is that we are different people, different nations, different religions, so that we can meet and cooperate and live in peace together. And so I think this is the message that these holy leaders should pass, rather than for some of them to antagonize against the other, or to want to burn the book, the holy book of the other, or to not to want to collaborate with the other. And so in this way, Islam is not a threat to the other. On the contrary, radical Muslims are a threat to Islam as well as they are a threat to others. And that's why we should extend our hands together, the moderates, in order to defeat extremism within the three religions, not only in one religion or the other religion. And in this way, I can see the future. I can see where religious leaders, if they read well their books, and if they pass that message to their followers, we can live much better. It will help for them to make a statement. It will help, but it is much more than the statement, is the work on the ground, is what they speak to their people and how we can collaborate with each other. We are starting a house in Yonah, Berlin, in Yonah, Germany, in this house we call it the Wasatiyah House, where we are going to have a Muslim, a Christian, and a Jew come if they want to pray, if they want to exchange knowledge about their religion with the other, if they want to collaborate with the other. And I think this is the spirit of the future. Instead of having a synagogue, a church, or a mosque, let us build one building where anybody can walk in and pray, so that there will be no separation of religion between the religious communities, and so that they could collaborate with each other and work with each other and understand each other and respect the right of the other to believe the way he believes and to accept that and to tolerate that. So basically that's our message.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Right here, my friend.
Thanks very much for your excellent presentation. I was really struck by your mention of the school situation. And so I have basically a nuts and bolts kind of question. We talked about the lack of resources in the East Jerusalem. Now, some people have said it's because they don't vote in the municipal elections. There's also been talk in the past, at least, I think Ben Vesti or others talked about a borough system. What can you see in the way of practical steps to improve the financial situation and improve the infrastructure in East Jerusalem? Is there any real political leadership in East Jerusalem that can push for it? Have there been any efforts to try to get some funding from the oil-rich states? And where do you see it may go, and what are the prospects of improving the infrastructure situation in East Jerusalem? I'm not a believer in economic situation, mitigating terrorism, but it seems to me there's something that's good to do for its own reasons.
I'm sorry that there isn't. I'm sorry that Jerusalem lacks leadership on both sides, which would actually try to bring the two communities together. And unfortunately, so much money has been donated by the Arab-rich countries, but it never arrived to its objectives. And there has been money that has been donated to build hospitals, to build schools, to build a better environment in Jerusalem, but unfortunately the channels through which the money has been donated never arrived. The train did not arrive to the station. However, I believe that now that Israel is in control of the city and the municipality collects taxes from the Arab Palestinians residents of the city, that there should be more pressure on the municipality to spend more on these facilities to improve them. Because one of the arguments also that the Arab governments or Arab donors would do not want to do is to fund schools that are under Israeli municipality, and so they always refuse to do that. So we have a bulk of our students who go to extremely poor facilities, and that's part when you see a 13-year-old kid carrying a knife and thinking he wants to go to heaven if he kills someone. This is part I blame these schools, and I blame the environment of these schools for something like that, for him to think that way. And it is education. And yes, he gets education at home, but also he gets a lot of that at school. And we have to improve the educational environment for him. We have to improve the quality of teachers, because also the teachers do not receive as much training, as much incentive as teachers on the other side. And this is one way to do it. At the same time, I believe that we should encourage the Palestinian civil society within East Jerusalem to prosper, because unfortunately there has been efforts really to clamp on the Palestinian civil society. And we have, on the contrary, to give them more, Israel has to give them more leverage to operate as long as East Jerusalem is under the rule and under the jurisdiction of Israel. And in this way, empowering civil society and giving them funding and giving them that will help a lot. And also empowering people to people, empowering activities that will bring Palestinians on East Jerusalem with Israelis on West Jerusalem together. So any joint projects in that field will be extremely useful in order to make both people live together in peace and try to coexist together.
Thank you very much, Professor Dajani.
Thank you.
General Gray, the last word, a great American.
Well, certainly very thoughtful, very difficult topic, and I want to thank both of our speakers and thank all of you for being with us. The one thing that crossed my mind in listening to this and your ideas, particularly Professor Dajani, about cooperation and peace and everybody living together. Most of the people around the world also want security, and control, and somebody who sees that, who follows the laws and all that kind of thing. And so there needs to be a governmental type of approach that follows your ideas and your guidance. And until we have that, we're going to be stymied a little bit. Who's going to enforce your ideas?
The people.
yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the people, but that's sort of a democratic type of a thought process and all that kind of thing, and it takes. It took us a couple hundred years before the Declaration of Independence to get the ideas straight, and so it's going to take a long time. Well, thank you all very much, and for all of you, have a happy holiday season and a prosperous new year.
I teach modernity, but I think statistics Oh, yes.
If you missed any of this conversation, you can find it online. We'll have it up at